So firstly, thank you very much for having me over for the discussion today. My name is Tenzin Tsundue. I am a Tibetan born and brought up in India. I live as a writer and I'm an activist in the Tibetan freedom struggle. Today I will briefly speak about the relationship between the Tibetan practice of Buddhist religion and a very serious concern of human rights which we are facing, and how the Tibetans are responding to the human rights violations that are happening in Tibet, and how we look at China as our adversary, not as an enemy. There was a time when here in Dharamshala, where I am living and speaking now, Dharamshala, the place which is the capital of the Tibetans in exile. Today there are almost about 11,000 Tibetans living here, with the Tibetan government in exile. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is also based here, and we've been here for the past 53 years, running the freedom struggle from exile, with almost about 150,000 Tibetans living outside Tibet. This has been the base, and this is the place from where we are functioning as an exiled community. There was a time when we used to look at China as the enemy, and every Chinese a possible enemy. There was a time in 1970s and 80s where any kind of Chinese will not be able to come within the Tibetan community without picking up a fight by any of the Chinese. There was a time when we looked at China or Chinese as just blanketly as enemies. But as time passed and as general political awareness started to grow within the Tibetan community, we started to look at things quite differently. We looked at Mao Zedong separately, we looked at Chinese people separately. And one of the most important factors that changed the Tibetan people's perspective of that was the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. I was in class 9, and we were, at that time television itself was quite new to the Tibetan community. We were standing around a television set and watching the incidents of Chinese PLA shooting at Chinese students in the middle of Tiananmen Square, and hundreds of Chinese students being killed by their own government, and the government remorselessly leading on the slaughter, and students running away, and tanks chasing them in the middle of the streets and on the main roads of Beijing. This completely shocked the Tibetans, and it impacted the Tibetans to have an understanding of two different kinds of things. One, the people and the people's aspiration for freedom and democracy. And two, what the government is doing to the Chinese people. And we saw two different categories. What the government has been trying to do and maintain a very tight control over the people. And later we also started to see kind of a resurrection of Buddhist practices in China, in different places. We used to think that Buddhism was completely destroyed in China during the Cultural Revolution. But it was only after 1990s when there was a revival of Catholicism, Christian Catholics, and also Buddhism. And we could see Chinese bend on their knees, bowing in front of the Buddha statues, and this was something we could relate very closely because we do it every single day. So as Buddhists, we could relate to the Chinese people. And I myself went into some of the histories and found out how the Chinese people and the Tibetans are very closely linked, as Buddhist, common Buddhist. Some of the Tibetan Buddhist lamas, particularly His Holiness the Karmapa, used to be a very important teacher for the Chinese people. And even today, there are a number of Chinese people from Taiwan, also from mainland China and Hong Kong, come to Dharamshala to get the blessings of His Holiness the Karmapa. So there are a number of dealings. And because of this, the general political understanding, the perspective of the Tibetan people to overall Chinese people has changed so much, and there is much more compassionate ways of looking at it. And this is both political change as well as the religious awakening and truly getting the picture of what is really happening there, and softening on the part of the Tibetans. And in the recent 10-15 years, number of Chinese speakers, writers, journalists, and also Buddhists came to Dharamshala, stayed here, and they themselves addressed Dharamshala population on the issues of China, about Chinese people's general political awareness, education, human rights conditions, and also of political changes. So we've been seeing really how changes are happening in China through these Chinese who have been coming out of China and coming to India and also telling us. And these also have impacted us in having the kind of a change that we have been seeing. But when it comes to issues of human rights, as Buddhists, the Buddhists would say that if there is something morally wrong going on and kind of an injustice that you are facing, bearing injustice even with your complete awareness and knowledge, a Buddhist would say it is wrong. You are not only bearing injustice on you and facing the injustice and the violence on you, you are actually appeasing the person who is unleashing and practicing that kind of violence on you and on other people. And it is important to compassionately make him know how much of violence that person or that party or the group is doing, that they were completely wrong. But at the same time, the world is not so naive in thinking that they do not know. Of course, the Chinese government, what they are doing, the human rights violations that they are causing in Tibet, and 60 years of Chinese military occupation of Tibet and completely suppressing the Tibetan people's aspiration for freedom and independence is completely crushed. And we see it, and Chinese government know this very carefully, and not only that, very, very craftily, strategically have been creating legal reforms that will further enhance the government to maintain that kind of a control on it. And yet the Tibetan people have responded. In the recent almost 30-40 years, non-violently maintaining our own strength to maintain our composition, maintain our sense of religion and culture, which is the basic identity of the Tibetan people, and not responding with violence, something that has happened in many other governments and cases of freedom struggles for democracy, where responses had happened violently. You do not see that in the issue of Tibet. And therefore, internationally, people, even though they are not directly able to support the independence of Tibet and that kind of a movement, they are sympathetic to the Tibetan people, and they have huge respect for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So both His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people have received international sympathy, and the kind of moral support that the Tibetan people have received is unprecedented, and therefore the Chinese government is ashamed wherever they have to go. Wherever Hu Jintao used to go, or wherever Xi Jinping will be going in all these countries, they will always face shaming protests, not only from Tibetans but people from around the world. And therefore, morally, how much it has actually impacted, given the sense of courage to the Tibetan people to maintain that. Now, in the recent since about 4-5 years ago, since 2008, when the protests in Tibet demanding freedom for Tibet and return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet, Chinese government, without looking at true aspiration of the people, what the people have been saying, what they're demanding, without looking at that, the Chinese government blindly cracked down on them militarily, using every bit of brutal forces and killing people, shooting protesters right in the middle of the street, and arresting people and harassing them, and just indiscriminately arresting people and taking them to jail and detaining them for days and days. So looking at all these violent suppressions in Tibet, Tibetan people, even then, without responding with violence, people have been going out into the street, raising their fists up and demanding freedom for Tibet, and also being shot at. And then in the recent cases, we have seen how many cases of self-immolations. People burning themselves and demanding freedom for Tibet and return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, a person who can actually set himself or herself on fire and willing to undergo that kind of excruciating pain, imagine what other violent thing they could have done. This is the courage when you can take your life, you can definitely take other people's life, but the Tibetan people have restrained from doing anything like this and continue to do this case of self-immolation, which has now come to 121. Day before yesterday, on the 28th, there was another case of self-immolation, which has now come to 121 cases of self-immolation. This is the Buddhist non-violent response to the human rights violations happening in Tibet, to the demand for freedom of Tibet, to the demand of return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet. And this is happening despite the Chinese government's promise for developments in Tibet, bringing in more money to Tibet, bringing in more highways and railways and more shopping malls to Tibet. Tibetan people, for the Tibetan people, their basic understanding of happiness is not money, not money. There's genuine peace and happiness, Tibetan people believe, comes from here. In whatever circumstances, in whatever situation, Tibetan people believe that if you can maintain your sense of calm and compassion in however trying, challenging situation, you can always be peaceful and non-violent, and with that you can help create that with your friends, with your family, with your community, and create an atmosphere of peace and calm. And this has definitely affected the Chinese also. If the Tibetan people have responded violently to all the military crackdowns from the Chinese government, imagine how damaging would have been the clash between the Tibetans and the Chinese. You don't see that today. Because Tibetan people's response has always been peaceful and not violent. And therefore we do not see Palestine-Israel kind of a conflict here. We do not see here the conflicts that we've seen in Afghanistan and Iraq. We do not see the kind of conflicts that we see in Tunisia, in Syria, in Sudan, or here between India and Pakistan. We don't see that kind of violence because Tibetan people have maintained their sense of calm from our side, even though fathers and mothers see their children dying in front of them, and yet a great restraint of non-violence has come. This has principally come because of Tibetan people's practice of love and compassion, which comes from Buddhism. The essence of practice of Buddhism is kindness and love and compassion. I'm now happy to discuss with you. If there is any question, I will stop here with this small lecture. I'm happy to discuss if there is any question, and of course, and not only question, if there is any comment from among the students or also from the teachers.
好，咁我哋多謝晒丹增東珠先生嘅演講，我哋不如俾啲掌聲。或者有冇問題想問丹增東珠先生？
I
I've been a fan of the Facebook. I just want to know what is the future of Tibetan Exile government? What will be the future direction of China? The future. What do you see the future? How do you see the future? The future of the development, political development.
Well, I'm not a Lama or Rinpoche, so I cannot predict future, nor am I any saint or prophet. I cannot see the future. What I can say is how we are likely to act in the next 10-15 years. We continue to believe that as much of freedom Tibetan people desire for us, we also believe that the Chinese people in China are deprived of the freedom that they want, and the young people in China, they today want more than just material benefits, want more than just what comforts and convenience money can buy. Young people in China today want more than just the comforts money can buy, so therefore they are already looking towards spiritual happiness. And I already know from number of Chinese coming here to India, and also through my number of trips to Europe and America and Australia, having met number of Chinese in those countries, that today China is changing, and China is changing so much. Change is not just economic and financial scenario, more for the Chinese people's overall look at the world and how they look at themselves. And for a long time, the Chinese people have been looking at themselves as a victim of the control maintained by the government. Today, the Chinese people feel more free as they have more money, as they have more tools for internal communication. And today, they feel that they should do more than what financial gains could achieve, and we understand that. So from our side, while being here with His Holiness's guidance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's guidance, and maintaining a democratic setup of a government from here, we hope to be able to go back to a free Tibet where His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be not only our spiritual leader, but he will be able to share his Buddhist wisdom and compassion to the Chinese people also. And this has been a very strong desire for His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself to be able to share his Buddhist wisdom and knowledge and the compassion to the Chinese people. And this kind of softening is needed on both the Chinese government and also from among the Chinese people. And we hope that change is truly needed and must come from within China. And kind of an understanding can definitely be done. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has repeatedly asked and proposed the idea of what is called autonomous region of Tibet. But it's been the Chinese government who has been not only rejecting the Dalai Lama's proposal, but not telling the Chinese people what the Dalai Lama has been proposing. So what His Holiness the Dalai Lama's true proposal for autonomy has not been communicated to the larger mass of Chinese population. They have been kept in blind, and Chinese government has been blanketly calling His Holiness the Dalai Lama a demon, and said that the Dalai Lama is a separatist and that the Tibetan people are separatists, and has never really communicated to the Chinese people. So there has been a hurdle between the Chinese people and the Tibetan people in understanding each other's desire for freedom and justice. And at least we are in the free country, we have more access to information compared to the Chinese people inside China. So these are a huge gap between His Holiness the Dalai Lama's proposal for autonomy and the freedom that Tibetan peoples desire. a gap between this and the Chinese people, who have always been having a stereotypical notion of Tibetans and the Dalai Lama as separatists, something that the Chinese government has been maintaining as a propaganda to their own people, keeping the people of China blind, and therefore it's only love that can truly liberate both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Finally, I have one more question. It's asking, how do you see the whole world is wanting the free Tibet, the movement free Tibet? And tonight we have a very fortunate, we have a professor who talks about on his historical point that Tibetan, since the ancient time, was always an independent, separate entity. In fact, on all the historical facts, we research from the 24th history, from the Tang Dynasty, Tibet always been an independent and non-inclusive China. So how do you see the autonomy, the full autonomy, not just autonomy, free Tibet movement, independence movement? How do you see? Do you talk
Yes.
about it? Thank you.
Yes. There are two issues here. One, the international scenario for the Free Tibet movement, and the other one is the case for Free Tibet. So in the international community around the world, most countries, including United States and many of the European countries, many of them have been trading with China. And United States and Japan, for example, are some of the key trading partners of China, where the trade bulk has gone beyond $600 billion worth of trade. And some of the European nations like the UK, France, Germany, their trade with China is again huge sum, and therefore these international governments, these governments run by many of the Western corporate companies, have, instead of really supporting the issue of Tibet, they have been siding more with China, so the Chinese government, and they have been maintaining what is called one China policy. They have a reason to maintain Chinese government's policy of one China because they benefit from the trade with China, and for China to maintain what is called the cheap made in China products. For them, the reason why they maintain cheap made in China products is, firstly, they use their own human population, almost about 800 million Chinese workforce, enslave them, make them work for hours and hours in a very poor labor condition. And there's no labor rights in China. So it is the cheap Chinese labor that has contributed in maintaining made in China products cheap. And then another reason why made in China products are cheap is because the natural resources like the oil, natural gas, uranium, copper, gold, lithium, chromite, bauxite, some of the most important natural resources for China come from occupied countries like Tibet, East Turkestan, and Inner Mongolia. These are the countries which the Chinese government has been ruling over, suppressing the local population, beating them. Any kind of protests are violently crushed, and their natural resources are taken to China and then contribute in production of cheap made in China products. So most of the Western countries are actually beneficiaries of these natural resources, and therefore they have an interest in maintaining the industries of the world in China. And therefore international communities, although in the general population people have so much of love and faith for His Holiness, they have so much of respect for Tibetan religion, culture, and the Tibetan people, but the governments have been benefiting from the cheap made in China products, and therefore they have not been supporting the Tibet cause. But there is a huge changing already coming. Many of these corporate companies whose humongous industries in China are already leaving China, they are now going to second cheapest places like Vietnam, Brazil, Mexico, India, Bangladesh, and Burma. and therefore it is likely to see a huge confrontation between Western corporate companies and the governments that they have been supporting and the Chinese government. So China is more likely to be in the next 10-15 years in confrontation with many of the Western corporate companies, many of the Western countries, and therefore it is the Chinese people who are going to face difficulties in the next 10-15 years. So this is truly the reasons where, although internationally people have faith and respect for His Holiness, they are unable to support the Tibet cause because of their national trait. The second point that I want to very briefly speak about is the issue of Tibetan independence. As very rightly observed by you from the professor's lecture, that Tibet had always remained an independent country, and one of the reasons is how we look at the Great Wall of China. Today China's borders have gone beyond the Great Wall, have occupied Mongolia, have occupied East Turkestan, has occupied Tibet, has occupied Manchuria. China as a country was ruled over by Manchurian Empire, and right up to 1911 China was a colony of the Manchurian Empire. So the real new China that we see today, People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. Republic of China, which is the name of the government of Taiwan today, was founded in 1911. So the real China emerged only in 1911. But China has today occupied Manchuria and owned its history. China has occupied southern Mongolia and owned its history. And China has also done the same thing with East Turkestan and Tibet. So today, China's history is overblown. China's population, China's landmass is overblown. Look at the Great Wall of China, which was built over a period of almost about 1,000 years, was actually built to protect the Chinese people from the Mongolians and the Tibetans, which were the Chinese used to call Changrang, the people of no culture, the people of no civilization. Chinese people used to fear the Mongolians and the Tibetans because they were warriors, and they used to come into Chinese villages and loot the Chinese villages of its rice, wheat, and Chinese women. And China, in order to protect its own country, created the Great Wall of China. So Great Wall of China was truly China's borders. But today, Great Wall of China is only a monument. And therefore, the Great Wall of China goes out to prove that Mongolia was an independent country, so was Tibet, so was East Turkestan and Manchuria. Now it is China's brutal economic and military power with which they have bullied these nations and ruling over them. So therefore, all these countries were an independent country, and I, as a Tibetan, continue to believe and demand that we live with China, but only as neighbors. I respect your religion, culture, your language, your independence. You respect that to me, and we can live together as neighbors, but never under each other. And therefore, independence of Tibet, what we call in Tibetan Ranzin, is the true aspiration of the Tibetan people.
Thank you. My name is Simon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your answer is perfect. Thank you.
还是国家省立三中线。
Another student want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Please.
你说国语，他跟你翻译。
I'm coming from England, China.
Okay. Tashibele. Nyao.
Any small information about Tibet is really like touch.
Yes.
Based on my own study as a student in the university, I found out that most of the university students hardly know and have very little awareness of the current Tibetan situation. She want to say, after I come to Hong Kong, I finally able to understand, to know lots of the current Tibetan situation. I want to know how can this news, this free this news about Tibetan can be transmitted to China.
Well, I feel very sympathetic with you in understanding your situation. Although China has almost about 500 million people using the internet, and a large number of Chinese population are today using smartphones, so they have information in their hand in their mobile phones. But the information that they have in their mobile phones or also on the internet, on their computers, are all censored information. And therefore, issue here is, here you have raised the issue about Tibet, but the problem over here is not Tibet. Problem over here is the censorship that the government has maintained for its people. The government, when I say government, I'm talking about the government set up by the Communist Party. It is the Communist Party of China. It is the CPC that is maintaining the government so that the government looks more like the mother and the people as its children, and the government government's perspective over its children has never changed. The government always feels that the children do not know, and children needed to be told only that much which the children will understand. So on part of the government, the Chinese people who are the children of the Communist Party has never grown up. So the people are always treated like children who are innocent, who do not know, and who need not be told of everything. So therefore, information is sifted and censored, and information is not just about Tibet and the Dalai Lama. More than the problem of Dalai Lama and Tibet is about the state secrecy, is about how the power has been inherited from Mao Zedong to Deng Xiaoping to Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping. The main reason why they wanted to maintain a smooth transition of power from these is because they have so much to hide from the people of China. And for example, Mao Zedong, who is now today known as the father of the nation, under his regime, more than 40 million Chinese people died, mostly during the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, both for political reasons and also for wrong policies by Mao Zedong. But people today are not only not questioning him, are unable to raise such issues, but at the same time many people know about it, but they do not talk about it. They do not discuss this. They do not discuss it openly like how happened here. It happens in India, for example. Any kind of issue, whether it's the Prime Minister or the President or the Chief Minister, any kind of ministers or members of Parliament, they are directly, openly questioned, and anybody found guilty is thrown into jail here in India. But that kind of freedom is not there in China. So the issue that you are raising about lack of information about Tibet and Dalai Lama in China, you will see that that kind of censorship is about everything that the state, that the government of China doesn't want the people to know. So therefore, people have been blinded. And I'm in the process of writing a poem where I'm calling China a country of blind, where everybody has been blinded by the state, and people do not know that they are blind. People do not know, and people are not aware, and they think whatever they know is the complete knowledge. And there is much more to do about it. And the world, I am sure, and I can communicate to the Chinese people that the world is more beautiful than black and white the government has created for the people. And on your question, how to spread information, more than I knowing the insides of China, you understand China more, and you will actually be able to see how in better ways, in more effective means, you can communicate to your own people, to your family, friends, your classmates, your friends in the neighborhood, how you can tell them what you have seen in Hong Kong. And if you come to India, if you go to United States, you will see much more, and you will actually be surprised, pleasantly surprised, that the world is much more beautiful than I believe that the Chinese government has created for you.